Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast, a podcast about how to grow your business from $100,000 and beyond in the land of the rising sun.
Welcome to the Scaling Japan podcast. I'm your host, Tyson Batino, and today's episode, I will be doing a solo cast with just myself. Before we start, here's a quick introduction to myself, your host. I'm the CEO of LaunchLab. We support setting up a company and back office in Japan. We also provide affordable advisory on raising capital, IPO, and other finance topics. I also run Scaling Your Company that provides courses and sales advisory and digital marketing agency services for the Japan market. If you need help, feel free to reach out. And the topic for today will be on starting a podcast in Japan. It's a question, or I do get people who reach out to me probably every month on starting a podcast. And I thought it would be a great idea to collect questions from people who follow me on LinkedIn and people who have reached out to me, make a list and answer those questions. So here is that episode, and let's dive straight in. So the first theme is around personal and professional impact of doing a podcast. So the first question is, what has been the impact both personally and professionally of doing these podcasts? For personally, it was, so the main reason I actually started the podcast is one is for customer acquisition for my growth services in sales advisory, marketing, digital marketing, and offline marketing advisory, website creation, and our courses on sales decks, trade shows, and more. But to sell basically my growth services was one. The second one was to actually increase my reputation and how well people know me. And the reason for that is when I was in OneCoin English, I wasn't the CEO. I was one of the 3 founders, but I was heavily operational. So I was physically at the location, managing teams, and no opportunities to do PR, a few opportunities to do interviews, which I did do later for the subsidiary which I created. But pretty much I was behind the scenes, and many people know my company, OneCoin English, but not too many people know me. So when I meet Japanese people, they're like, oh yeah, I've heard of that company, but I'd say not many people knew my name. So through the podcast, I hope to get, I guess you would say a goal is every serious entrepreneur in Japan, both who are foreign, should know who I am, is the goal. And I would say, so it's impacted me professionally, but personally as well. It's, I really, because let's say, my co-founder was on TV all the time, it was, I really, really wanted that. So I feel really happy. And I do feel the acknowledgement as a result of doing this podcast and doing, I think, like 80 or 85 episodes now. The other thing that's been pretty cool in terms of personal is I would go to a startup event, could be Venture Cafe, Takeoff Tokyo, and I'll meet usually more than 10 listeners every event. I think one time I had 20 people come up to me, I think at Takeoff Tokyo, and say, oh yeah, you're the guy, hey, is that you, Tyson, from the Scaling Japan podcast? So that's been really cool being recognized. And you wouldn't think so because each episode only gets like 250 to maybe 550 downloads, or maybe it's 300 now. But so you wouldn't think that many people knew me, but when I do go to these events, people do know who I am. Next question is, how has it helped the people you've interviewed? So I know some of them have gotten clients. I would say especially those who serve SMBs tend to get clients. If their target audience is corporate, I've had some people get some corporate inquiries, but not too much to be honest. So I think it's more in people who are consultants or who serve SMBs and startups tend to get the most outreach, and that makes perfect sense. Because a good chunk of the owners are small business owners and startups as well. Also, there's startup ecosystem people like startup cities, but they tend to not need services or not usually actively looking for services. What has been the impact on the broader ecosystem of your audience? Yeah, I would say I think it definitely has an impact. Uh, Many people I've spoken to have said, like, I listened to 3 episodes, I've listened to 5 episodes, or this one episode was exactly what I needed to listen to at that exact moment. And I wanted um, a lot of information on how to do it. So I've been complimented quite often on how deep we go into a topic. And yes, I'm pretty happy about that. The next one is I imagine it's quite an investment to get this up and running. And I would say, as well known as yours, how would you consider the return on investment thus far? And how long did it take for that to kick in? So this is a great question, and I'll try my best to answer it. I would say that it really took 6 to 8 months for it to start to kick in terms of people reaching out to me for business, or meaning people who wanted to use my growth sales and marketing services. And the reason for that is, my guess is, I think when if you see a person and they only have like 5 episodes or 10 episodes, like you're not sure if you can really take them seriously because you've seen so many podcasts that start and they just finish at like 3 episodes, 5 episodes, or under 10. So I think in our case, it wasn't to really around like maybe 20 episodes, 25 episodes that I think people started to take me more seriously and reach out for advisory. Also, I'd say in the beginning episodes, I didn't really have a clear service. So that could be another reason as well why it took, let's say, that we didn't really start getting the advertisements or like promotional ads for my own businesses started maybe around 10, 15-ish. I'm not sure. So that could be another factor that we didn't put in the promotions early enough. So, yep, to answer your question, probably on 20 to 25 episodes. For ROI, I don't have a way to calculate it because it's I think with a lot of people, it's a combination. Like maybe they'll reach out through my site and say they found me on LinkedIn, but it really was the podcast that made them change their mind. So my attribution um, tracking could definitely be improved. But I personally feel it has had an impact, has increased my street cred, and I think it's brought in a lot of opportunities that wouldn't have happened if it weren't for the podcast. And as of this one, with 85 episodes, I think with just doing the podcast, I think there's a possibility where for my monthly subscription advisory service, I think there's a good chance with that plus LinkedIn posts where I might not actually have to look for clients if I wanted to do a solo operation. Okay, next is starting a podcast, and it's how have you balanced helping listeners discover the highlights as they listen versus sharing the key quotes and highlights through marketing? What approach have you found works well for your listeners? This is actually a good question. If anyone's listening, I don't actually ask for enough feedback from listeners, and that's something I could improve on. Sometimes I'm a little bit, would say, I guess, not, I wouldn't say arrogant, but the belief that I know what people want to listen to. So to answer that question, I think for me, what makes my podcast interesting is that uh, it depends on the topic, but you get to listen to two experts talk about a topic, or like marketing, for example, or sales. And so I think having two people who are knowledgeable on a topic really provides a lot of value. in that one is if someone were to explain something technical based on my, let's say, advising many different businesses on sales and growth for marketing, it's I can kind of understand like what areas they don't understand. So if a guest were to say something and I feel that they didn't go deep enough or they didn't clarify enough, I can follow up after the guest and simplify what they mentioned or add additional points of context that will help the listeners understand better. So I think it's often that back and forth interplay with the guests that really helps, let's say, listeners to discover highlights or I think more importantly, I think everybody kind of, I would say like the highlights. I mean, like everyone understands the highlights for everyone can be different. So the key point is by having that back and forth of different angles, we can have a lot of different highlights for people. So I think rather than going just for the, let's say in terms of marketing, what highlight can I show on LinkedIn or YouTube or Instagram? For me, I think it's more thinking about how can there be multiple highlights and different highlights for different people. In my case, the reason for that is I have a wide audience. You know, I have investors, startup city people, country managers, startup CEOs, small business owners, marketers, uh, but budding entrepreneurs. And for that reason, I kind of have to want to give everyone's highlight will be different. But if you have maybe something that's more niche or industry specific, maybe let's say thinking about the highlights, like one, you know, like what is the killer or really banger highlight, you could maybe think more about that. But in my case, because it's general, it's best to keep it broad. And is there anything else regarding no, I really think just me knowing the same amount as the guest, definitely other times less, sometimes more. I think it really helps to really get a deep conversation and covering multiple angles is our unique sales point for the Scaling Japan podcast because I really want to focus on the how and for people to get that aha moment. Like I tried this, but I haven't tried that. And so because you've explained the three-part process, I'm going to try the part I haven't done yet. And yeah, I'm not, I mean, it could work for some people, but for me personally, I don't listen to highlights. Like for me, I think listen to highlights is a waste of my time because I feel it doesn't have enough context. And so I actually like to listen to the things in whole. Okay, next, in terms of distribution platforms and SEO. So yeah, I'll say to rank for the term podcast in Japan is pretty tough. There's some ranking sites like let's say I think there's some like podcast lists or the Apple list. And like for you to rank on Apple's list of podcasts in Japan is really, really hard. So yeah, it's pretty tough. And the other things, I think there's Spotify, Apple have their own charts. There's Podtail. There's some very different ones that has like let's say ones, but I would say on Disrupting Japan, my own Scaling Your Company, our list of podcasts I think are pretty comprehensive. So I think one channel is to maybe get your podcast featured on the Disrupting Japan list, the Japan Dev list, and the Scaling Your Company list. And so let me just actually I want to answer this question again. In terms of distribution platforms and SEO, have you found a particular tool most helpful to optimize the listings? I'll say definitely putting it on Spotify has been really useful and YouTube. Google Podcast, they're actually stopping it, and it was a waste of time. Like we would get like 0.0%, 1, 2%, like one listener a month out of like 1,500. So I can understand why Google sunsetted it. But yeah, Apple and Spotify is definitely worth doing. Maybe there's some other like podcast discovery channels you can put it on there, but to be honest, other than YouTube, Spotify, and Apple, it's pretty much like 5%, like 1 to 5% at best. But if you check Skin in Japan podcast, there's a list of places we broadcast on, and you could just copy that. Another good platform was, yeah, SEO works pretty good for us. I have one of the top articles, I think, for podcasts in Japan. Also, being featured in the Disrupting Japan's list, podcast list, which they have a pretty good list. And thanks, Tim, for featuring us. And yeah, but to be honest, it's to get an app or Spotify's top 50, it's probably not going to be that possible because you're competing with Japanese ones as well. And so I find that sometimes we appear there, we might jump to like 50, maybe like 100, and it just disappears. So I haven't found those channels particularly useful based on my tracking.
Hello, listeners. I'm excited to announce my live cohort course to help you increase your sales in Japan. Many foreigners struggle to turn first meetings into second meetings because they lack a sales pamphlet that follows the standard format in Japan. Even if you have a good first meeting, your internal contact will hand over your current sales pamphlet to the decision maker, and they'll take one look and say, they don't get Japan. My live 4-session cohort course will teach you how to make a sales pamphlet in English using the standard format in Japan. You will receive a sales pamphlet template, more than 10 examples from Japanese companies, and a lot of feedback, so you can end the course with a sales pamphlet that gets more meetings and therefore more sales. Getting one extra deal will more than pay off the course, so joining is a no-brainer. You can find more details of the course at scalingyourcompany.com/sales pamphlet. And we'll have a link in the show notes.
But I do like how you can just post. I think we can just post on Spotify, and I think it automatically updates to RSS through different podcast channels. So it's pretty streamlined there. For me, yeah, I would say LinkedIn has been great for promoting my podcast, and I promote every episode on LinkedIn. So for those who like each episode, thank you so much. Like, we spend a lot of time producing this. If you're not liking each episode, please jump on that. It is really a lot of work to do 3 to 4 episodes a month, and yeah, if I get like 10 likes, it's like, yeah, is it really worth my time? So if I can get like 30 likes per episode, I'm very happy with that. And you would be supporting the startup ecosystem as well, because I think the issue we have with the startup ecosystem right now is we have so many scattered players. And so I'm trying to solve that issue by having that one consolidated place where you can find, I mean, we have like probably 100 blogs now, but 100 blogs, 80 podcast episodes, and we're just concentrating all that knowledge. And we're going to be having, I think, a chat bot. And so by you liking and engaging with our posts, that helps us get bigger reach, which also gets us more customers, which I can refund into developing more content. A follow-up in their question was, and what unique factors should they consider compared to podcasting in other markets? I would say probably unless it's learning English, I would say your Japanese listening base will be pretty low. Or they'll listen to a few podcasts, but they probably won't listen to I don't have too many Japanese like hardcore fans, where all my hardcore friends are probably are foreigners. Maybe that'll change if I did it in the Japanese language, but us producing 3 to 4 episodes in English enough is mecha taihen. And so I don't want to be creating 4 more episodes. 3 and 4 is a lot as it is, trust me. That's why so many people give up, or very few people are producing as much content as we are, like 3 to 4 a month. consistently and over 2 years. So I think the flywheel, I mean, it's really just being consistent, doing it on LinkedIn, getting YouTube viewers, and email newsletter. That's essentially the flywheel there, and SEO as well, possibly. But the key factor is really think about your target audience. So in my case, my audience is small, like there's probably like 1,000, maybe 1,500 listeners, but they just tend to choose what they want to listen to. And so, yeah, in my case, because I do broad service, that can kind of work. But if you're more niche, like education or marketing, your target audience is going to be much smaller and it's probably going to be much more knowledgeable. So if you're going to go niche and the target audience is really knowledgeable, you might have to really be an expert there, or you bring on really good experts who can answer the questions and provide the needs for the listeners. Common challenges, yeah, I think it's just the same. It's just getting started. But kind of my thought is if you're not going to do 50 episodes, and let's say we spend 4 or 5 hours. Yeah, if you're not going to spend probably 350 hours, let's just say if you're not willing to spend 400 hours, probably podcast is probably not the best option for you. But if you have an audience, or like we say, have a topic that people are interested in that isn't super saturated, I think especially for niche, I would say niche would work really good if you're just consistent with it. If it's general market, I think there's a much higher chance for failure. So yeah, so I have to take my point back. I would say if you're targeting a niche, definitely don't start if you're not going to do 50, because it's going to take time and for you to get enough content for people to binge on. If it's general, you might really have to work hard on getting traction, appearing on other people's podcasts to get that traction. And even if you do 50, you might not get traction, whereas a niche, you probably would get traction. Workflow and tools. Yeah, it's evolved over time, but the original workflow was I would choose the guests, I would come up with the questions, interview the guest, and I would listen to the audio and I would write the edits that I would want. And I would send that to an editor on Fiverr for like 25, $30 an episode. Now it's much easier. I choose the guests. I can come up with the questions in like 5 to 10 minutes. Get the guests to just approve. We do the recording. My staff team, they take it, they listen to it, edited it, create a YouTube video, upload it, create the LinkedIn posts. For the podcast ones, is actually my team who posted on my personal profile. And they post it. So I think that's how my workflow has changed. To do the episode, it's about 1 hour. To find the guests and come up with the outline in the beginning, probably 30 minutes to 1 hour. Now I think I can do it in like 5 to 10 minutes. 10 minutes if it's an area I'm not familiar with. 5 minutes if I know the area and can jot it down quickly and know what the audience would want to listen to as well. For the editing part, I think that takes around 2 hours for fast. People are fast. Yeah, I'll say 2 to 3 hours to edit the podcast. Or like if you want to edit it, 2 hours is, like bare minimum. 5 minutes, or sorry, I would say 4 to 5 hours with deep editing. But actually, I should know that question, but actually, we usually get interns to edit our podcasts, and my manager oversees them. But I think they take about 5 to 8 hours to edit a podcast. Plus, now that we've added YouTube, I think it might be another 5 to 8 hours for the video. And so we're working on a way to edit the video, and so it edits audio. And I think they might have figured that out. So sorry, I can't answer that Haken would be better to answer that question than me. But that's my guesses on it. So what types of tools do you regularly rely on within the workflow described? So for the recording, we use, I think they changed their name, but it's Talk Studio Labs. For the editing, my team is using DaVinci. It's free, and I think they've been able to make YouTube videos with it as well. So they're using DaVinci, but it's only been 1 month since we used it. For audio, it's before we did videos, is Audacity, which is free. It works pretty good, actually, to be honest. For Talk Studios, I have a lifetime plan with them because I gave them like $100 when they first started. But I would say if I didn't have that lifetime access, I would probably use Riverside. And I think there's one other one I can't remember. I think it's like a Spanish last name, like Castro or something like that. Yeah, I would say those are the ones. I've tried some auto AI-based podcast editing tools. They did a fine job of eliminating some uhs and ums, but we found that for the price they charge and our price structure, that there wasn't too much of a difference, and we're just nervous if they miss something, so we still do it manual. But and there's some other I think AI tools now, but I haven't tested them out from Talk Studios or Riverside. But Riverside would definitely be worth checking out. And maybe the podcast editing tools might be much better now than since I looked at it like 6 to 12 months or maybe 8 to 12 months ago. Did you settle on a publishing cadence and sequence of your podcast that feels right? And are there any failed experiments that occurred as you're identifying this that you can describe? My personal belief is that I thought like once a week was too much, but actually I think once a week is the right amount. And the reason for that is I think in my case, I think I do have regular listeners, but I think I tend to have more binge listeners. And what I mean by that is we have categories like investment, sales, marketing, and management. And like, if someone has an issue, they'll just go into one of those categories and, dig really deep. So I think for us being, if we could do prompt 4 episodes or like once a week, basically, or at minimum 3, we can cover a lot of topics for growth and doing a business in Japan. So for me, going with 3 to 4, the main reason is domination. I actually want to dominate, or I want every topic about business in Japan covered by my podcast. And so anyone who's looking, they find me. What I did was, I think most podcasts, they go with more of guest focus, like, hey, they talk to the guest, what do you want to talk about? But I think in my case, it's more theme focused. Like, if you're going to listen to any podcast or any episode on influencer marketing in Japan, we have 2 episodes just for that. Or if you want to learn about government sales in Japan, you don't have to check out 3. You don't have to check like 4 episodes with different people to get tidbits. We did 3 interviews just on sales to the government. So you get a much more comprehensive viewpoint. So I think, and to have that level of coverage, I think we do need 3 to 4 a month. So like my thought is some people do it twice a month. I would say if I had a bigger audience, I would probably consider it twice a month. But I don't think it brings enough ROI for me at the moment to do twice a week. So maybe if we were to take off on YouTube, or if we could go to like maybe 1,000 to 2,000 downloads per episode, I would consider doing it twice a week, but I don't think we have that market size for how-to content. I think for aspirational content or curiosity content, you can definitely get more, but for how-to, for people who take action and they're looking to improve how they take their action, Yeah, I think the audience, I'll be happy with 1,000, 2,000, to be honest.
One of the common challenges I see with my consulting clients is not having any staff internally who can drive marketing strategy and execution to the next level. This really limits the growth trajectory of a company, especially for a leader like you that wants to go from 30 million to 500 million yen a year and does not have the time to spend years learning through trial and error. To solve this problem, I'm launching a marketing agency that can help companies like yours to increase leads and closing rates through SEO, Google Maps, content marketing, and websites that convert. Head over to scalingyourcompany.com and book a free consultation. Let's talk about what your business needs are, where your current strategy is letting you down, and how we can help you see real results with the methods I've successfully implemented at multiple companies myself. Now, back to the episode.
Oh, I guess one more on the cadence and sequence. I think another unique insight to me was to separate it by category. So I think it's much easier for people to find. So they can just check for marketing, investment. If you go to the website, it's clearly sorted. And so I think that was one unique way of sequencing the podcast to make it searchable. Because I think once you get to 80, even 50, you have the discovery problem where you just have too much content and not enough ways to distribute it to get people to listen. So that's why you see some podcasts, hosts who maybe they post only 1 or 2 episodes a month, though, or when they go on vacation, they'll just do a replay. But they do want to keep that weekly cadence as much as possible. And one thing I like about weekly too is we try to do it on Monday, I think Saturday and Monday. It's just people expect it. I want people to think, oh, Saturday, new Scaling Japan podcast episode. Or Monday, Tyson's going to post about it on LinkedIn. So I think having the consistent, it does work good. What are best practices for practicing, rehearsing, ensuring life's conversation will flow and doesn't experience technical challenges? So in today's case, I was feeling a little bit not super energetic, so I just use Zoom. And Zoom pretty much always works. The recording is really easy. The file size isn't too big. The audio quality is good enough. The video quality could be improved, but I'm not using my good camera at the moment. Of course, audio is more important. So I'm using the good mic. But yeah, I think for me, so I think for technical, I would say if you use like Riverside, that could be pretty sure, but Zoom is pretty consistent as well. And rather than using Wi-Fi, using a landline could reduce the likelihood of technical challenges. In terms of technical meaning, like, facilitating the actual episode, I would say a good outline that covers 70% works pretty well for me. And I think that reduces going on tangents or going completely off script or a completely unrelated topic, unless that's what people like about you is you go into tangents. But yeah, I think having that outline is good. Also, it's good for the guest as well, where you can just bring it back to the outline and they can look at the outline and, oh yeah, okay, this is what I need to talk about. But if you don't have the outline for the guests, that could easily become chaotic and go spiraling out of control into random topic land. What equipment do you use for recording? So I wouldn't say I'm serious, but I would say I think I have the right balance between simplicity and impact. And so I'm using the Shure USB. I'm trying to check for the number, but it's the Shure USB microphone. And it's like M7H maybe. I think the S7MB or whatever, that one I think is you need the device, a separate device, which is really expensive. So in my case, I just got the USB in. The other one is I have a Rode like podcast hook, which is pretty good. Oh, I don't want to hurt myself. And you may see on the video a little bit. I guess not. But that one is when I didn't use video, that was perfect. Right now, because we're doing video, I use something like I have just a small like 1,000 yen tripod, but the video, because you don't have, the audio comes out much clearer. And so I think that was one trick too. When I had I think having putting the microphone the right distance from your mouth is critical. And ironically, I didn't really learn this point until episode maybe 65 or 70, where I was on a podcast live in person. And they're giving me feedback. Oh, you need to go closer to the mic. We find this as right. And I was like, oh, cool. I'm going to copy and do this. So I think ideally, and I wasn't doing it for this episode, but I think it's around like 2 to 3, sorry, centimeters, maybe like 8 centimeters, maybe 8 to 10 centimeters, maybe up 4 inches is a good distance. How do I prepare your recording environment? Definitely bring some water. And I didn't bring some today, and I'm on the 42nd point. And if this was like a 2-hour interview with a guest, that'll probably be 1 hour speaking time for me. But yeah, I think at around 30 minutes of speaking time, you definitely feel the dryness. And that's pretty much it for setup. Content and guest management. How do you assess the guests, knowing not all experts are great storytellers and have good chemistry for the host? Yeah, I would say that is a tough one. It's I mean, usually the easiest one is, has this person been on a podcast before? And that's something I ask most guests is, have you been on a podcast? And then based on that, I will adjust how I interview them. Or just to give an example, one is I'll explain the process of the podcast where you're going to be speaking 70%, kind of following this in general. You can go off into tangents. I'll bring you back if needed. But my podcast is unique in the sense that I want to speak 30%. And that other podcasts, you might speak 90%. But for my podcast, I want to speak 30%. And so sometimes I do have to explain to them that, and also like, oh, if you make an error, just do a clap. And the editor will hear that and they'll know to edit it out. And so, yeah, just giving them some feedback on how to be a guest is helpful. Yeah, the tricky one, not knowing. So I guess, yeah, if they have been on like, 10 to 15 podcasts, there's a pretty good chance they are a great storyteller. But the downside is they might have told that story elsewhere. So that's the challenge. The people who are really good, oftentimes they might have told that story elsewhere. So, and when people listen to content, like, I already heard that story, like people don't want to listen to the same thing twice. So I think that's one thing you have to be careful of the serial podcast guest, which I am one. But my unique point is, in general, I try to have unique content for every podcast appearance when I'm on someone else's one, because, yeah, I don't want people to use generic points that they've talked about on other podcasts of mine as much as possible. 100% is impossible, but as much as possible to avoid it. So we have unique content that listeners can only find here that is exclusive to the Scaling Japan podcast. So for me, yeah, I think I think the guests that I have the hardest time with, for me personally, is those who want to always have the last word. Where I think where they're trying to be over promotional, or they really want to push themselves as the expert and not sharing the space. For me, that's the hard one, because I think they sometimes they would say something, I would say it in I would summarize what they said and add one point. Then I think they would try to summarize everything again. And so I think that kind of took away a lot of time for uh let's say, and was always having to have the last word is a little bit annoying at times. But I understand a lot of the guests, they prepare pretty hard and they do want to get results out of it. So I'm typically cool with that and get where they're coming from. So yeah, I tried to give you a broad range of answers here, but I hope at least one or several of them will hit with you in terms of choosing guests. Another thing is, I find that I prefer to choose the guests and accept people who reach out to me saying like, I could talk about this topic. The main reason for that is I really want someone who's really knowledgeable, not an up and comer on a topic. I mean, I do sometimes give chances to up and comers because everyone deserves a chance, but I often find that the best quality content comes from the people that I choose because I think that person's really good at a topic. So I'll say I'll probably have like a 60 to 70% hit rate, whereas I do give up and comers a chance. Yeah, how do you get guests to accept? That's a good question. I'll say in the beginning, start with your friends, especially start with high profile friends who can bring in listeners. So I have some guests, they post on LinkedIn, 100 likes. So I think go with friends who have an audience, then leverage, and you can leverage that successful episode with your guest who's a friend and use that to get other guests. But and also I guess try to find people who want to promote themselves is another good. They're usually easy to get as guests. What are some mistakes you have made as a moderator or host? And how would you prevent yourself? Yeah, I think sometimes I would be a little bit actually no, we haven't had too much trouble to be honest. I think by choosing experts, I found that like if I was not prepared well enough for a podcast episode, I could just whip up some questions last minute and just tell them like these are kind of what I'm thinking, but I'll just ask you some general questions, like anything else you want to add, and I'll leave it up to you. So I think not being prepared enough is a mistake, but by choosing expert guests, and I'm very well experienced as well, so we can kind of get around that. The other one, yeah, I think it's just consistency, where I think in our case, because it's mainly just me doing half, then passing out to the other team, for probably more my part because I'm busy. I sometimes do skip checks. I don't follow the checklist, and so I'll say, as a newer podcast host, probably having more of a flow or consistency will prevent you from making mistakes. Has it been most helpful to seek inspiration from podcasts with similar goals? Yeah, to be honest, like my approach to making my own podcast was a unique approach because my thought was like my pain point was like I couldn't find any podcast that really covered the how. How do I do this one thing? Like I want to make a website. How do I build a website in Japan? I want to hear someone talk about that. Like you would listen to, there would be episodes where you'd hear people talk briefly about it and other topics as a part of a more general theme like design. And I wanted to fill that need where if anyone has a question on a certain topic for marketing, sales, investment, running a business in Japan, operations, hopefully they can find it on my podcast and have something definitive on it. So I think, yeah, I guess looking at what other podcasts were not providing and my pain points, I figured I wasn't the only one who had that pain point. And so I think that helped. But also I would say probably more for if you want to go more general market, I would probably be studying more podcasts, or I might be studying more YouTubers and studying like their flow, their storytelling, their background. I need my lava lamp with my dim and maybe some blue lights in the background. So I was going for a more general audience. I think I would probably do that. But I'll say my audience are, I guess, typically, if you're going to listen to me talk about how to create a podcast in Japan for 50 minutes now, you're pretty serious, or at least you're seriously considering it. So I think having that kind of fluff, like where it's needed for general, but it's my case because I don't want to deal with general public. I want to deal with people who are serious about growth, serious about improving themselves as a leader. I probably just focus more on content quality. So when people mention like, oh, you could do YouTube shorts, I'm like, yeah, you're looking for shortcuts and like good luck. But if you're really serious you got to dive deep. So when people give that suggestion, it's like, yeah, meh. I'm for more people who want to take action. Co-hosting and remote podcasting. I've been thinking about searching for a co-host, but it's like a co-founder. Any experience you had on that? So I do have one experience where I would say, a sub-host where I think we made 20 episodes, or I would say he made 20 episodes. I made probably 2 or 3. Maybe create the content, the script, or maybe like additional 3 more, but it was my partner who did most of it. And it was a good he was a good host, good editing. I liked it. But ultimately, I think he pivoted to a different industry, and so the podcast wasn't a priority anymore for his. So my learning point, I think, before I mentioned too, like if you're not going to do 500 hours, or if you're not going to do 50 episodes and not continue, even if you get no traffic or no interest, it's not going to work out. And I think it's similar to a co-host. You need to find someone who's really, really serious about a topic, and they're not going to pivot. That's their passion. They're going to make it happen. They're going to continue pushing forward, even when you don't want to, even when you get busy. Even this episode, it's like, yeah, I could have just relaxed for 1 hour. The heat is killing me, but let's say I promised the audience I'd get at least 3 episodes a month, so I'm gonna do this. And that's the type of host you need. Just it's could be chemistry. I mean, chemistry with you is important, but even if you have chemistry, like, can you make it to 50 episodes? So I think first off is find someone who can do 50 episodes, then search for chemistry, and then that's the right person for you. But I would not start with chemistry, then create it, because they might just not have it in them to make 50 episodes and to persevere no matter the results. And I think you can imagine you can think of a lot of podcasts who did have co-hosts, won't say names, but you can see that happen where they don't continue because they got busy. Okay, that is my thoughts there. Thank you for listening. And thank you for all the questions. And please, please, please always like, subscribe for the podcast.